Caught in a deadly mob crossfire, an exhausted, pregnant waitress is pulled from the wreckage by Chicago's most ruthless crime boss. He believes he is merely saving an innocent bystander. However, an emergency ultrasound soon reveals a chilling, deeply personal secret destined to tear his criminal empire apart. The neon sign of the Starlight Diner flickered with a persistent, annoying buzz, casting a sickly pink glow over the rain-slicked asphalt of Chicago's West Side. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, burnt hash browns, and cheap disinfectant. Isabel Stanton wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, her other hand instinctively resting on the heavy, swollen curve of her 7-month pregnant belly. Her ankles throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. It was 2:15 a.m., and her shift was supposed to end over an hour ago. The diner was mostly empty, save for a trucker snoring in a corner booth and a lone man sitting near the window. Isabel's eyes flicked to the man. He had walked in 20 minutes ago, bringing a sudden, suffocating shift in the room's atmosphere. He wore a charcoal, custom-tailored suit that looked entirely out of place against the cracked vinyl of the diner's booths. His dark hair was immaculately styled, and his sharp, hawkish features were set in stone. He hadn't touched the black coffee she poured him. He simply stared out the window into the driving rain, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering neon. This was Vincent Moretti. Isabel didn't know his name, but she knew the type. You didn't submit in this neighborhood without recognizing the silent, lethal aura of a man who commanded violence. "Refill, sir?" Isabel asked softly, stepping up to his table, the glass pot trembling slightly in her tired grip. Vincent slowly turned his head. His gaze swept over her pale, exhausted face, down to the stained apron stretched tight over her belly. For a fraction of a second, the coldness in his eyes fractured. A ghost of a memory, a painful, buried phantom, flashed across his face. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it across the Formica table. "Keep it," Vincent said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Isabel's spine. "And go sit down. You look like you're about to collapse." I can't accept this," Isabel stammered, staring at the money. It was more than she made in 3 shifts. "And I'm fine, really. Just a few more tables to wipe." "Take it," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Before Isabel could respond, the diner's front window exploded. A deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the quiet night. Shards of glass flew like deadly shrapnel, tearing into the vinyl booths and shattering the ceramic mugs on the counter. The trucker in the corner didn't even have time to wake up before the bullets found him. Isabel screamed, dropping the coffee pot. It shattered, scalding liquid splashing against her sneakers. She froze, paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming violence. A heavy hand clamped onto her arm, yanking her violently downward. Isabel hit the floor hard, crying out as a sharp pain lanced through her side. Vincent was on top of her, shielding her bulky frame with his own body. He had moved with terrifying speed, drawing a heavy, matte black handgun from his shoulder holster in the same fluid motion. "Keep your head down!" Vincent roared over the relentless cacophony of gunfire. Outside, the screech of tires indicated multiple vehicles blocking the street. The rival Falcone syndicate had finally made their move. Vincent had known an assassination attempt was imminent, but he hadn't anticipated them being brazen enough to strike a civilian diner. The diner's facade was being chewed to pieces. Plaster rained down on them. Vincent fired back through the ruined window, his shots precise and deadly. 2 men in dark coats collapsed on the sidewalk, but more were pouring out of the SUVs. "We can't stay here," Vincent growled, grabbing Isabel by the collar of her uniform. "Can you run?" My baby," Isabel sobbed, clutching her stomach in sheer terror. "I won't let them touch you. Get up." With a surge of adrenaline, Isabel scrambled to her feet. Vincent kept himself between her and the street, providing covering fire as he shoved her toward the kitchen. They burst through the swinging doors, past the terrified fry cook hiding in the pantry, and slammed through the back exit into the narrow, rain-swept alleyway. Waiting at the end of the alley was a heavily armored black Cadillac Escalade, engine already roaring, driven by Vincent's fiercely loyal enforcer, Dominic. "Boss!" Dominic shouted, kicking the rear door open. "Get in," Vincent ordered Isabel. She stumbled forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her pregnant belly slowing her down. A bullet ricocheted off the brick wall mere inches from her face, showering her in red dust. She screamed, her knees buckling, but Vincent caught her around the waist, practically throwing her into the spacious back seat of the SUV. He dove in after her, just as a barrage of bullets hammered into the vehicle's armored plating. "Drive," Vincent commanded. The Escalade tore out of the alley, its tires screaming against the wet pavement. Inside the dark cabin, Isabel curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. The reality of the last 3 minutes crashed over her. She was a nobody. A broke, pregnant waitress desperately trying to scrape together enough money to pay off the medical debts her late mother had left behind. Now, she was covered in glass dust, sitting next to a mob boss. Vincent holstered his weapon and looked at her. His suit was ruined, dusted with plaster and spotted with the blood of his enemies, but his demeanor was eerily calm. "Are you hit?" he asked, his eyes scanning her trembling form. "No," Isabel choked out, tears mixing with the soot on her face. "No, I don't think so." Suddenly, she gasped, a sharp, white-hot pain ripping across her lower abdomen. She gripped the leather seat, letting out a fractured cry. Vincent leaned forward, his expression tightening. "What is it?" "It hurts," Isabel whimpered, her hands pressing desperately against her stomach. "My stomach. Something's wrong. The fall. I fell too hard." Vincent's jaw clenched. 5 years ago, his wife had bled out in his arms after a car bomb meant for him. She had been 6 months pregnant. He had watched the life drain from both his wife and his unborn heir, completely powerless to stop it. He had sworn on their graves that he would never be helpless again. "Dominic!" Vincent barked, his voice laced with a sudden, fierce urgency. "Forget the safe house. Take us to the estate. Call Dr. Harrison. Tell him to prep the medical wing immediately. If this girl loses her child, I will hold everyone accountable." The Moretti estate was a sprawling, fortress-like mansion, hidden behind high iron gates and dense forestry on the outskirts of the city. The Escalade bypassed the main entrance, speeding down a reinforced concrete ramp into an underground garage that looked more like a military bunker. Isabel was fading in and out of consciousness. The pain in her abdomen came in vicious, rolling waves. Every jolt of the car felt like a knife twisting inside her. As soon as the vehicle stopped, Vincent pulled her out. He didn't wait for his men to fetch a stretcher. He simply lifted her into his arms. Despite her advanced pregnancy, he carried her with surprising ease, sprinting through a set of double steel doors into a pristine, brightly lit corridor. This was Vincent's private trauma center, built specifically to treat bullet wounds and injuries away from the prying eyes of the police and rival syndicates. "Put her here," a calm, authoritative voice instructed. Dr. Harrison, a brilliant surgeon whose gambling debts had forced him into the permanent employ of the Moretti family, stood by a state-of-the-art hospital bed. He was already pulling on sterile gloves, flanked by 2 stone-faced nurses. Vincent laid Isabel gently on the bed. She took a hard fall during a firefight. She's 7 months along. Severe abdominal pain. Isabel groaned, tossing her head weakly side to side. Please, my baby. You have to save my baby. We're going to do everything we can, miss, Dr. Harrison said, quickly cutting away the ruined, blood-speckled fabric of her diner uniform to expose her swollen belly. I need an IV line started, and bring me the ultrasound machine immediately. Vincent stepped back, leaning against the cold tile wall. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a rare sensation for a man known for his icy detachment. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Isabel's panicked face. The metallic smell of blood, the stark white lights, the desperate pleas of a pregnant woman. It was all violently tugging at the scars of his past. Is she bleeding? Vincent demanded, his voice echoing sharply in the room. Minor spotting, Dr. Harrison replied, his eyes focused as he spread a thick, clear gel over Isabel's abdomen. Could be placental abruption from the trauma, or just premature contractions brought on by stress. I need to see what's happening inside. Isabel grabbed the edge of the bed rail, her knuckles turning white. She squeezed her eyes shut as the doctor pressed the transducer wand against her stomach. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic, rapid whoosh, 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 emanating from the ultrasound monitor's speakers. Fetal heart rate is elevated, but strong, Dr. Harrison murmured, staring at the black and white static on the screen. 155 beats per minute. The baby is distressed, but the placenta appears largely intact. The fall didn't detach it. Isabel let out a shuddering breath of relief, opening her tear-filled eyes. He's okay. He? Vincent asked, stepping closer to the monitor. Yes, it's a boy, Isabel whispered, a faint, fragile smile touching her lips despite the pain. I'm having a boy. Dr. Harrison continued to move the wand, capturing different angles to ensure there was no internal bleeding. But as he dragged the transducer over the lower quadrant of her uterus, his hand suddenly froze. The doctor leaned in closer to the high-definition monitor, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He tapped a few buttons on the console, zooming in on a specific cluster of pixels. What is it? Vincent asked, instantly detecting the shift in the doctor's demeanor. His hand instinctively drifted toward the gun holster under his ruined jacket. Harrison, talk to me. This is highly unusual, Dr. Harrison muttered, adjusting the frequency of the sound waves. Miss Stanton, you said you are 7 months pregnant. Yes, Isabel breathed, panic rising in her throat again. Why? Is he deformed? Is something wrong with him? No. The fetus's development is perfectly normal for 28 weeks, Dr. Harrison said slowly, his eyes darting from the screen to Vincent, then back to Isabel. But, Miss Stanton, did you undergo in vitro fertilization? Were you implanted? Isabel's face went completely pale. She looked away, shame and fear warring in her eyes. Yes, I didn't have a choice. My mother died and left me with crushing medical debt. The collectors were threatening to break my legs. I found a private clinic. They offered me a massive sum to be a surrogate for an anonymous wealthy couple. They implanted the embryo. Vincent's eyes narrowed. A surrogate? What clinic? The Genesis Hope Institute, Isabel whispered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vincent's blood turned to ice. The Genesis Hope Institute was the exact fertility clinic he and his late wife had used 5 years ago to freeze their viable embryos before her cancer treatments had started. The very same clinic that had mysteriously burned to the ground in an arson fire 3 years ago, destroying everything, including what Vincent believed was his last chance at a bloodline. "Harrison," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "What are you looking at on that screen?" Dr. Harrison pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. Modern high-end IVF embryos, especially those belonging to high-net-worth individuals, are sometimes tagged with a microscopic, biocompatible RFID tracer on the outer membrane during the freezing process. It's a safeguard against theft or clinic mix-ups. The tracer safely dissolves shortly after birth, but while in utero, our advanced imaging can pick up the metallic density signature. The doctor typed a command into the keyboard. A serial number, faintly decoded from the density scan, flashed onto the screen. VM001A. Vincent stared at the alphanumeric code. The air was entirely punched out of his lungs. He felt dizzy, the world tilting sharply on its axis. VM. Vincent Moretti. That's... Dr. Harrison swallowed hard, looking at his boss with wide, terrified eyes. "Vincent, that is the exact serial marker from your and Isabella's file. The embryos weren't destroyed in the fire." Isabel stared at them, completely lost, clutching her stomach. "What are you talking about? Who are you people?" Vincent slowly stepped forward until he was standing directly beside her bed. He looked down at her swollen belly, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. A sight no one in the criminal underworld had ever witnessed. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who had just gunned down 4 men without blinking, was entirely undone. The child growing inside the terrified waitress wasn't some anonymous rich couple's baby. "They stole him," Vincent whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of profound awe and murderous rage. He gently reached out, placing his large, blood-stained hand lightly over Isabel's stomach. Beneath his palm, he felt a strong, sudden kick. Vincent looked into Isabel's terrified eyes. "You aren't carrying a stranger's baby, Isabel. You are carrying my son." The revelation hung in the sterile air of the medical bay, heavy and suffocating. Isabel stared at the terrifying man standing beside her, his large, blood-stained hand still resting gently over her swollen stomach. Vincent Moretti, the ruthless head of the Chicago underworld, was looking at her with a vulnerability that defied all logic. Your son?" Isabel stammered, shrinking back against the hospital pillows. Her mind violently rejected the information. "That's impossible. The clinic told me it was an anonymous, wealthy couple from Seattle. They paid my mother's debts through a shell corporation. You're lying. You're just a gangster." Vincent withdrew his hand, his expression hardening, though the raw emotion in his eyes remained. He turned to the doctor. "Harrison, print the genetic markers. Show her the proof." Dr. Harrison hurriedly complied, the machine humming as it produced a long, glossy strip of paper detailing the embryo's origin data. He handed it to Isabel with trembling fingers. She read the names printed at the top. Donor A, Vincent Joseph Moretti. Donor B, Isabella Maria Moretti. Status, viable. Preserved. Tears spilled down Isabel's pale cheeks. "I don't understand. If he's yours, why was he implanted in me? Why didn't you know?" "Because 3 years ago, the Genesis Hope Institute burned to the ground," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous gravel. "I was told the backup generators failed. I was told the cryogenic tanks thawed. I was told my last remaining connection to my late wife, my only chance at a bloodline, was reduced to ash." He turned his back to her, pacing the length of the room like a caged panther. The implications were monstrous. Someone had orchestrated the fire to cover up the theft of his unborn heir. Someone had purposely chosen a desperate, indebted waitress to carry the child, hiding the boy in plain sight in the poorest district of the city. And tonight, the Falcone syndicate had tried to slaughter her. "Dominic!" Vincent roared, the sound echoing off the tile walls. The heavy steel doors slammed open, and Dominic stepped inside, his suit battered, but his posture rigid. "Boss, lock down the entire estate. Nobody enters, nobody leaves without my direct authorization," Vincent commanded, his eyes burning with lethal intent. "I want a 24-hour guard on this wing. Then I want you to find the former director of the Genesis Institute. I don't care if he relocated to Europe or buried himself in a hole. Find him, break his fingers until he gives you the name of the broker who paid off Isabel's medical debt, and bring that name to me." "Consider it done," Dominic nodded, glancing briefly at Isabel before turning on his heel. For the next 3 weeks, the Moretti estate became an impenetrable fortress. Isabel was confined to a luxurious, sunlit suite adjoining the medical wing. Her cheap diner uniform was replaced with silk maternity gowns. Her meals were prepared by a private chef. Yet despite the opulence, she was a prisoner. A highly valued, fiercely protected prisoner. Vincent visited her every evening. Initially, the visits were tense, fraught with Isabel's terror of the criminal empire surrounding her. But as the days passed, she saw a different side of the mob boss. She watched him sit in the dim light of her room, listening to the baby's heartbeat on a portable fetal Doppler. She saw the profound, aching sorrow in his face when he spoke of his late wife, and the fierce, unyielding devotion that replaced it when he felt his son kick against her ribs. "You don't have to be afraid of me, Isabel," Vincent murmured one night, sitting on the edge of her bed. He reached out, his fingertips gently tracing the curve of her stomach. "I know the world I brought you into is dark, but I swear on my life, no harm will ever come to you or this boy." "What happens when he's born, Vincent?" Isabel asked softly, her heart aching. "Do you just take him? Do you throw me back onto the street with a payout?" Vincent stopped, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The thought of letting her go sent an unexpected jolt of panic through his chest. She was the woman breathing life into his fractured soul. "No," he stated firmly. "You are the mother of my child. You belong here, with us." Before Isabel could process the weight of his confession, the heavy oak door of her suite flew open. Dominic stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, an iPad gripped tightly in his hands. "Boss," Dominic said grimly, "we found the clinic director. He talked before he bled out. The hit at the diner wasn't ordered by the Falcones." Vincent stood up, his jaw clenching. "Explain." "The Falcones were just the muscle," Dominic continued, stepping into the room. "The man who paid them to hit the diner, the man who orchestrated the clinic fire and stole the embryo. It was Lorenzo Rossi." The air in the room vanished. Lorenzo Rossi, Vincent's underboss, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding. Lorenzo had stolen the heir to secretly ransom the child to the Falcones, aiming to usurp Vincent's throne once the boss was broken by the loss. When Lorenzo realized Vincent might discover the surrogate, he hired the Falcone hitmen to erase her. "Lorenzo," Vincent whispered, a terrifying, icy calm washing over his features. "He's inside the compound right now." As if on cue, the estate's emergency klaxons began to wail, bathing the hallways in flashing red light. Gunfire erupted from the east wing. The siege of the Moretti estate was an inside job, a bloody coup orchestrated by a traitor who knew the security protocols intimately. Lorenzo Rossi had bought off a dozen of Vincent's perimeter guards, allowing a heavily armed strike team to bypass the iron gates and breach the mansion. "Dominic, secure the corridor!" Vincent roared over the blaring alarms, drawing his custom 1911 pistol. "Harrison, lock the safe room doors. Nobody gets in." Isabel gasped, doubling over as a jagged, agonizing contraction ripped through her abdomen. The sheer terror of the alarms and the echoing gunshots had pushed her body past its breaking point. Water rushed down her legs, soaking the silk sheets. "Vincent!" she screamed, clutching her stomach. "The baby! He's coming!" Vincent froze, tearing his gaze away from the door. Dr. Harrison rushed to the bed, his face pale with panic. "She's in abrupt labor, boss. Her blood pressure is spiking. I need to deliver this child now, or we lose them both. Do your job, doctor," Vincent ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He turned back to the reinforced steel door of the medical suite. He could hear heavy boots pounding down the marble hallway outside. Lorenzo's men were coming to finish the job they started at the diner. Vincent pressed his back against the doorframe, his weapon raised. He wasn't just a Mafia boss protecting his territory anymore. He was a father defending his family. The corridor outside exploded into violence. Dominic and two loyal guards engaged Lorenzo's strike team in a brutal, close-quarters firefight. Bullets shattered the expensive artwork and tore through the plaster walls. Vincent stepped out, his aim deadly and precise. He dropped two of Lorenzo's men with clean shots to the chest, moving with a cold, calculated fury. "Push, Isabel! Keep pushing!" Dr. Harrison's voice rang out from inside the room, barely audible over the deafening roar of gunfire. Isabel screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony and desperation. She gripped the bed rails, her knuckles white, pouring every ounce of her strength into bringing the child into the world. In the hallway, the loyalists were taking heavy fire. Dominic took a bullet to the shoulder but kept firing, forcing the attackers back. Then, stepping over the bodies of his own men, Lorenzo Rossi appeared. He held an automatic rifle, his face twisted in a sneer of betrayal. "It's over, Vincent," Lorenzo shouted, ducking behind a marble pillar. "You're weak. You let a ghost and a pregnant waitress make you soft." "You stole my son, Lorenzo," Vincent growled, his voice cutting through the chaos like a serrated blade. "You desecrated my wife's memory." Lorenzo laughed harshly. "I was going to rule this city, Vincent. That bastard child was just my insurance policy." Isabel let out another piercing scream from the medical bay. Vincent's eyes darkened with an ancient, terrifying rage. He didn't take cover. He stepped directly into the open corridor, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past his head. He walked toward Lorenzo, a relentless force of nature. Lorenzo panicked, raising his rifle, but Vincent was faster. 3 rapid, deafening shots echoed through the hallway. The first bullet shattered Lorenzo's knee. The second struck his shoulder. The third embedded itself squarely in the center of his forehead. The traitor collapsed backward, dead before he hit the marble floor. Silence crashed over the corridor, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and Dominic's heavy breathing. Then, from inside the medical suite, a new sound pierced the quiet. A sharp, healthy, resounding cry. Vincent dropped his weapon. He stumbled back into the room, his hands shaking, his chest heaving. The harsh, fluorescent lights illuminated the scene. Dr. Harrison stood at the foot of the bed, holding a tiny, wriggling infant covered in blood and amniotic fluid. "A boy, boss," Dr. Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion as he quickly wrapped the newborn in a sterile white towel. He's perfect. He's perfectly healthy. Vincent approached the bed, as if in a trance. He reached down, his large, calloused fingers gently brushing against the baby's warm cheek. The infant stopped crying, his tiny hand blindly reaching out to grasp Vincent's index finger. A tear, hot and heavy, slipped down the Mafia boss's face. He had lost everything to the darkness of his world. But here, in the midst of blood and ruin, life had returned to him. He looked up at Isabel. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but her eyes were shining with a fierce, beautiful light. She reached out her arms. Dr. Harrison carefully placed the child on Isabel's chest. She sobbed, pressing a gentle kiss to the boy's head. Vincent sat beside her, wrapping his arms around both of them, shielding them from the world outside the steel door. "We'll call him Matteo," Vincent whispered, pressing his forehead against Isabel's. "Matteo Joseph Moretti. And I swear to you, Isabel, the violence ends tonight. I will dismantle this empire. We are leaving Chicago. I will give you and Matteo the life you deserve." Isabel looked up at the ruthless man who had saved her life, seeing the profound love that had finally conquered his inner demons. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, knowing they had survived the storm. The truth hidden in a waitress's womb tore a Mafia empire apart, but it forged an unbreakable family in its wake. Vincent sacrificed his underworld throne to protect the woman who carried his stolen legacy, proving that even the darkest souls can be redeemed by love. If this thrilling story of betrayal, sacrifice, and ultimate redemption kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this incredible dramatic tale with your friends, and subscribe for more.